The shepherds were key players in the Christmas story. They were just common, ordinary, average men who suddenly heard a message from the angels, and they had a choice. They could have kept it under wraps and thought, what should we do with this information? Or they could have dropped everything, left their jobs, left anything that was a priority in that moment, and made that child in Bethlehem their priority. And that's what they chose to do. They dropped it all to put Jesus first in their lives. And today now, more than 2,000 years later, we are still celebrating that baby born in a manger in Bethlehem. What would it mean for you if you dedicated these next 2 weeks of the Advent season putting Jesus first in your life? I mean, really putting Jesus first in your life. Is there a particular activity that you might put on the back burner to make time for him? Might there be people that you've been putting off making a phone call to or sending a card to that you might bump up on your priority list because Jesus asked us to love him by loving others? What one significant thing can you do this Advent that would take you one step closer to putting Jesus first in your life? Only if even for these next 2 weeks. You might want to really think about that question, because our message today, you see, applies directly to that. We've been talking in these last few weeks about God's attributes that are often kept under wraps at Christmas. Things that you might not want to be talking about at Christmas, things that are very unexpected. We talk first about how God is sometimes dangerous. Sometimes he asks us to give in ways that are scary, or to do things that are out of our comfort zone in order to just shine his light in the darkness. Last week, we talked about how God is expectant and how he expects us to come to him. But today, we're going to look at an attribute of God that we may have a little trouble with. How does the fact that God is a jealous God strike you? I have to admit that this was a tough topic for me today. As a matter of fact, it was so difficult that when I studied all of the biblical references to jealousy on this subject, a lot of the commentaries didn't even address that word or any foundation of how that word is used. Sometimes they just skipped it altogether. I kind of felt like skipping it myself, if the truth be known. And yet, when I dug into this, I learned that these are beautiful and amazing scriptures that are really about God's jealous love for you. Part of the reasons I think the thought of God being jealous is so difficult for us is that in many places in the Bible, jealousy is not a good thing to possess. Yet when you look at these verses that do refer to God being jealous, the message is clear. You must have no other gods before me. Do not make an idol for yourself, no form whatsoever of anything in the sky above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow down to them or worship them, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. That's the very first of the 10 Commandments. And in Deuteronomy we read The Lord your God who is with you, and among you is a jealous God. The Lord your God's anger will burn against you, and he will wipe you off the fertile land. And then the psalmist writes, how long will you rage, Lord, forever? How long will your jealousy rage like fire? As we dig deeper, we also learn that God can be provoked to jealousy. Psalm 78 says, they angered God with their many shrines. They angered him with their idols. And in Deuteronomy, they made God jealous with strange gods, aggravated him with detestable things. I wonder what idols and shrines in 2020 are detestable to God today. Now, I suppose this discussion of jealousy and envy at Christmas isn't really out of place, because, come on, admit it, aren't you kind of intrigued and excited? Don't you maybe have just a little bit of jealous desire for some of these incredible technology gadgets and things that are out there? Yes, the biggest TV ever created is now available on the market. But I have been fascinated by the smart plugs that now you can put all over your house, and in just a voice command, you can sit in your easy chair and say, turn up the thermostat, turn on the Christmas music, turn on the Christmas lights, and not even have to move. I also am absolutely amazed by the robotic vacuum cleaners that with a voice command will just suddenly vacuum up all the dog hair and all the crumbs under your bed with just a brief voice command telling it to do the work that used to take us a little while to do when we vacuumed our homes. And during the coronavirus Christmas, oh yes, there are some special things this year as well. There are now instant read thermometers that every mother on the planet is probably thrilled about, because you no longer have to try to stick that thermometer under your child's tongue for 3 minutes. And those smartwatches that you always loved getting your text messages and emails right on in an instant, now those watches will give you your oxygen levels and your blood pressure also. Listen, envy is a part of human emotion, but it is also an emotion that God knows very, very well. But to understand how this envy and jealousy plays in with God, it has to be understood from the place of his jealous love for us. So let's look at 3 things: the meaning of jealousy, the causes of God's jealousy, and then we'll finally answer that question: does God have a right to be jealous for our love? So let me begin by talking about a distinction between jealousy and envy. To envy is to want something which belongs to another person. The commandment says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, his wife, or his servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. In contrast, jealousy is the fear that which we already possess will be taken away by another person. Someone else will get the job that we want, or our spouse will be attracted to someone else. Often, jealousy and envy go hand in hand, as in the story of 2 shopkeepers who were very bitter rivals. I can remember reading this particular story a long time ago, but it returned fresh in my mind this week when I was seeing all of the updated states that are shutting businesses down again and closing the doors of the restaurants and entertainment facilities again because of the increase in COVID. There are places in our country where state lines run right through the middle of Main Street. So on one side of Main Street, all the businesses and restaurants are open and people are going in and out. And on the other side of the same Main Street in the same city, the businesses are shuttered down and they're dark. This particular story was about a business situation very similar to that. But these store owners in this particular story, who were on opposite sides of the street, were always in competition to see who could be better off, who could have a longer line waiting to get in for reservations. The other would smile in triumph when they got a little more business than the other. And you know how these things work. 1 hour, one business was doing better than the other. So they were constantly feeling that hideous weight of envy and jealousy. One night, an angel appeared to one of the shopkeepers in a dream and said, "I will give you anything you ask, but whatever you receive, your competitor will receive twice as much. Yes, you can be very, very rich, but your competitor will be twice as rich. So if you wish for a long and healthy life, he will have a longer and healthier life. So, what is your desire?" The man frowned, thought for a moment, and then said, "Here's my request. Strike me blind in one eye." I think this story would have been better if it were a genie in a bottle telling this story. Because God is not that kind of a jealous God like this particular store owner. God's jealousy is not something that bitterly wishes ill towards any other person. No, never. God's jealousy is more like the story of this young second grader who came home from school and proudly reported to her dad that in Girl Scouts she was now an official brownie. Well, not to be outdone by her exuberance, her younger 5-year-old brother rushed up to his dad, grabbed his dad by the coattails, proudly exclaiming, Dad, guess what? Now I'm a birthday cake." He couldn't stand to be left behind of getting the accolades and recognition that his sister was getting. That little boy just didn't want to be left out and not recognized. Is God's jealousy maybe a little more like that young boy that didn't want to be pushed aside by his sister? I'm going to let you decide that. So let's unpack this just a little bit more. So jealousy in the scripture is used in 3 different ways. First, we see it as an intolerance of rivalry or unfaithfulness. This would be like the jealousy that a spouse would have, because when 2 people are married, there are exclusive rights that go with that relationship. Jealousy also appears in a second way, as a result of feeling inferior when the accomplishments of others are touted. King Saul would be a great example of this. He became jealous of the young David, who was receiving all kinds of accolades for his military victories. This would be a little like that 5-year-old boy. And jealousy is also seen in a third way, as hostility towards a rival, as one who believed to have had an advantage over another. This would be like the store owner in that illustration I just used. And most often, human jealousy falls into this category. We see this in Genesis 37 when Joseph's brother were so jealous that their father seemed to like him more, that they sold their brother into slavery just to get him out of their lives. And later in Acts 17, we see how a group of Jews incited a crowd against Paul because they were so jealous of him. You see, jealousy, like envy, is very common in the vice lists that are found throughout the Bible. You know them: pride, greed, anger, and lust. But Proverbs tells us that while anger is cruel and wrath is like a flood, oh, jealousy is even more dangerous. In fact, James regarded jealousy, or what he called bitter envy, as characteristic of earthly demonic wisdom and as the source of all disorder and wickedness. My friends, these are pretty strong words. So if God has a jealous love for his people, let's look at what makes God jealous. And there are so many scriptures about this. Bottom line, God is intolerant of rival gods. And our rival gods are all things that take priority over our one true God. God's jealousy comes from our lack of faithfulness, when the choices we make cause us to turn our back on him and worship and serve and spend our money on other things that are not more important, but in some cases more pleasurable, or so it might seem. Think about the time, for example, that God took the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And as soon as things got tough, what did they do? They built a golden calf, and they worshiped that false idol, another foreign god. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They lost their trust so quickly in the God who had saved them. I might have been tempted, if I had been God, to let them go on back to Egypt, but no, that is not who God is. He loved his people, and yes, he was upset with their decision that they rejected him, but he never turned his back on them. He never let them go alone. After the Israelites finally did get to the promised land, remember, Joshua kept reminding the people of all the things God had done for them to get them there. He warned them that if they were not faithful to God, God would not tolerate them cheating on him, worshiping false idols. And again, this was the very, very first commandment. And they still couldn't be obedient. But please hear this, and it's really important that you know that idols are not just things from ancient days. What are those things today that keep you from spending time with God? Think about the things that you spend your money on. Idols, we all have them. Yes, we all have them today. So is it time that we prioritize where our passions should be? What I hope you understand today is that unwrapping God's jealous love for you, you'll realize the depth of his love for you. I mean, how would you feel if you had a spouse that you deeply loved and had provided for, and then you found out that they were not even being faithful to you? How must a parent feel who sacrifices everything, everything for their children? They provide food on the table, a safe home, education for them. And then those kids go off and leave home and never have time for the people that have loved them most throughout their entire lives. I imagine this is how God probably feels when we put our to-do lists and our jobs and other people, our shopping, our desire for all the newest and greatest and biggest things, anything that takes time away from him on the top of our priority list, I'm sure that hurts him. No one feels good being pushed to the bottom of a priority list. And God's love for us is so strong. He too is jealous for our devotion, for our love, and for our time. Now you might wonder, what right does God have to be jealous for our attention and our love? After all, what right does he even have to want such a personal relationship with us at all? Why should he care that he wants us? Why should we care that he wants us to be successful in our parenting and to have good and strong marriages, and also to be successful in our careers and the jobs that we do? Why does God want us to be financially strong with abundance in our lives? What right does he have to want the best for us? Well, have you forgotten what it was that you accepted when you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? I think we need to be occasionally reminded that when we accepted what Christ did for us on the cross, we understood the price that he paid for us to have eternal life. So yes, it may seem difficult to see God as having jealous love for us, but he wants our hearts, and he wants our devotion, and he does want to have a loving relationship with us. He just wants us to put him first. You've heard me say this before, and I imagine you'll hear me say it again. The best expression of love is time. How about giving God some time this Christmas season?